welcome back to another episode of Raise 'Em Up as we continue in this journey with this book, The Spiritually Vibrant Home by Don Everts. And we've made our way, believe it or not, this is episode 6 of kind of our second season, so to speak, our second book that we've been kind of walking through. And I've certainly come to appreciate just in the time that we've had to really reflect about how important it is we're doing what we're doing, right? Of just being able to talk about what it means to raise up kids in the faith. And especially how helpful these books have kind of been. And it's kind of an exciting day because we have another guest with us for a second time. Mr. Kyle Cahill is joining us. Good to have you with us. And then we have Tracy and Melanie with us as well as we get to kind of return to it and continue in the metaphor section. So I kind of said last time that we're getting into the meat of the book, and the reason why it's one of my favorite books so far, in that I love the metaphors and I love where it kind of takes us. And so who wants to kind of help us dive into chapter 5, which is all about having loud tables, which means having spiritual conversations. Who wants to give their first thoughts on what they read today?
I love the metaphor for this chapter as well, that we really need to take a step back from our technology mindedness and get back to face-to-face conversations, because not only are we used to having mediated conversations over technology, but all of our stuff in the household can sometimes be mediated through what we're watching on the TV or having phones in our hands and stuff. So even our face-to-face conversations are actually affected by the technology around us. So I love the metaphor that talks about having a table conversation, not a television sort of a conversation, because our human interactions are so necessary, and it's so necessary to have them authentically. But in our technology world, we tend to flip the channel to whatever we want. We can pick and choose the types of human interaction we watch and absorb on TV or on the internet. And that can be really tempting to do with our real life as well, to say, oh, I'm in the mood for something funny, and really tap out of some of those vulnerable and uncomfortable situations when real conversations can happen. So I loved that because it spoke to me. I know that I flip the channel wherever I want it, and I watch whatever show I'm in the mood for. And I can see that playing out as well in my daily life. Somebody calls me on the phone and I look and I'm like, not ready to go there. I'm going to let that one go to voicemail, and I think that was a wake-up call for me, just the metaphor right off the bat.
I identified with the idea of technology being a replacement for that face-to-face conversation with teenagers and college kids. I grew to love the text, "Come here," right, in my house, because so many times, and I hope I'm not an anomaly there, but my kids text me from my house all the time.
That's so funny.
They'll be upstairs and I'll be downstairs and I'll get a text something super mundane, just piece of information, or don't forget I'm going somewhere, And when they say "come here," it's like, oh, now we have a face-to-face, right? And I think that is a reality for parents with texting and teenagers, and is that kids are they're really willing to have hard conversations via text. And I think our generation would never have we would have rather sat down. It would have been easier, but for them, it's easier to have these kind of tough talks via text.
Absolutely. And I think the author kind of points that out, that we have run away from having hard face-to-face conversations, because I love on chapter 5, page 110, it says, the reason the cat's got our tongues when it comes to spiritual conversations or hard conversations is a fear of offense, relativism, which just means that everybody's truth is their own truth, pluralism, which is there's lots of different ways to get to the same spiritual end, secularism, that we don't really talk about spirituality, but really that we have this fight or flight response, and we fly away from conversation because we are afraid that when we are fully present and vulnerable, that anything that we say is going to get twisted, misconstrued, or it's going to pigeonhole us into some sort of label that we're not ready to accept.
Right, there's that vulnerability. Like
Yes.
that's where I kept coming back to that word in this chapter about being vulnerable, because when you're sitting at a table like we are now, it's like you're vulnerable to on the spot type questions, right? Or on the
Absolutely.
spot.
What do you mean by that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or,
Are you saying
what do you
this?
say about that? You know? So I definitely feel like that vulnerability is key in that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've come to appreciate lately too is the question behind the question, or the thing behind the thing. And so kind of as we're talking, and it's interesting because like I want to kind of unpack for folks that maybe didn't get to read this chapter, that are just listening along with us, kind of some of the illustrations that were brought out,
Yeah.
because this is, y'all both gravitated toward this technology piece, gravitated toward this TV metaphor
Mhm.
that was used, but it really wasn't even just a metaphor. Like, and really for the listener, like it was this comparison between a TV and a table. And y'all were really getting into the table,
Yeah.
like that unpredictability side of it, and the TV. And the word that stands out to me is not necessarily vulnerability, but I think it's a key piece of it, but the word control.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. And so you think about with a
Right.
television, you can control
Yeah.
everything going on. With the phone
For
ringing,
sure.
and you can turn it off.
Right.
Yep.
The text message, the email, you don't have to respond to it.
Mhm.
And I think, like y'all mentioned, like this generation, right? We're talking about young people are very comfortable with a text message approach to deep conversations, or an electronic approach. But I think it's actually true of adults too. And I think it goes back to that word control, right? And so, I mean, who in here has not written an email they had to delete?
Right.
Because you felt all full of control when
Yeah.
you were typing it up,
Yeah.
but then you realize I don't need to say that. And I, a lot of times when that happens to me, or when it does happen to me, I will delete it and I will make a shorter version that says, I would love for us to be able to talk.
Talk about
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's really kind of where I land with it. And so, and y'all were specifically, you were on 110, I was going to take it on to 111, because it continues. There's a specific psychologist and sociologist.
Mhm.
So someone that studies people and our brains,
Mhm.
Sherry Turkle, who really pointed out this digital age and digital means of communication and how it's affected how we have actual conversations. And so this really stood out to me. She describes the net effect of technology mediated communication this way: it all adds up to a flight from conversation, at least from conversation that's open-ended and spontaneous, conversation in which we play with ideas, in which we allow ourselves to be fully present, and Tracy's word, vulnerable, right? And then Turkle laments this flight from conversation because she's convinced that, quote, face-to-face conversation is the most human and humanizing thing that we do. And that really reminded me of what you were saying earlier, Melanie. And then she kind of unpacks it even further, or another one, Don kind of points this out with another theologian, Wesley Hill, who talks about this myth of freedom, which I thought
Yeah.
was so cool. I was like, call that out.
Yep.
Because the way he describes it, he says it's the myth that the less encumbered and entangled I am, or the less accountable and anchored I am to a particular relationship, the better able I am to find my truest self and secure real happiness.
Yeah.
If your deepest fulfillment is found in personal autonomy, then friendship is more of a liability than an asset. And
Right.
I would go so far as to say not just friendship, but relationship and
Yeah.
conversations are more of a liability, we feel like, than an asset or a reward.
Yeah, and looking at that section again, we're seeing less and less deep conversations, because this myth of freedom makes us feel like if I say something deeper, again, if I'm pigeonholing myself into a particular belief, or I'm standing by this exact, I'm saying this is what I believe, and that is a statement that we see less and less of. Like, here's what I think, here's what I believe. We tend to be very okay with saying, well, whatever you think is fine for you and whatever makes you happy, or, I don't know if that's necessarily what I believe, but I think people should be able to do this or do that as long as it makes them happy. Like, so we're so afraid of standing on any kind of singular belief for ourselves, because we're afraid of how that's going to be perceived by others, how it might affect others, and how they're going to start to view us differently. But it's all this myth that I need to have freedom to just be me, to just find my truest self, to live my best life. And by doing that, we're actually isolating ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're weaker because we're not willing to hang on to anybody, or we're not willing to fight for anybody. We're not willing to really explore the depths of what we believe, because we're convinced that nothing is solid. And when nothing is solid, what are you doing? You're floating around in outer space with no anchor.
Well, and at the base level, right, we're just made for relation. Like
Yeah.
we know
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
We know that truth over and over and over again. So when we avoid it for freedom, for that myth of freedom, we're just avoiding the reality of what we're called to be in by nature, right?
And we see this technology, and this is beyond the Barna research for this book. This is everywhere. I mean, it's a pretty well-known state of being for most of us that this generation is the most connected to everyone, and yet they are the ones that feel the
Lonely
most isolated,
and
the
lonely,
most
yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
And again, I thank you for saying that. Call out that myth of freedom, because when you're so afraid to stand up for anything or step on toes or just be solid and make stake a claim, you end up living your life floating, which kind of is fun and free for a little while, but then ultimately it's terrifying
Yeah.
because then you're pushed and pulled in any direction.
And I want to take it like a step lower too, because I almost think that Wesley Hill misses it a little bit too, because it's not necessarily the myth of freedom; it's the myth of autonomy, right? And so I think, especially for our listeners, again, this is all about raising up kids in the faith. So there's a couple of layers that I'm seeing involved here for the purposes of what we're trying to do here, and that's one: our kids are growing up in this. Like that's terrifying, right? So like they're growing up in a very confusing world without a foundation. And like you said, it's kind of like, are we actually convicted by our own beliefs or not? And I would go, well, Melanie, I don't know. We're not talking about it.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty much what the chapter tells me. But then the second layer too is then similar to, I'm having flashbacks to Sticky Faith for a moment too, and the conversations that Kara and her husband would have with their kids. In this household, right? And so there's a layer too for our families. Even within our own families, there's this isolation, this myth of autonomy, even amongst our own families, that we don't have conversations. And so it really struck me just in general as Don kind of introduces this chapter. And I would go as far as to say, was anybody surprised at anything said here so far? Yeah, I mean, like especially, I think I was a little astounded at the beginning. Don kind of points out towards the beginning of the chapter, as Barna surveyed all these Christians, 75% of the Christians surveyed said they had less than 10 spiritual conversations in a year.
In a year.
And he went on to clarify that meant 10 conversations in a Bible study or about something in the Bible, 10 conversations that were spiritually focused with your spouse in a year, or 10 conversations that had to do with like a message you heard at church or something like that. So on average, Christians, 75% of Christians are having less than one conversation a month about faith and God. And this is where I go, again, are we surprised at what's happening to the people of God, the church, right?
Well, and I think the fear that I would have for these kids that are growing up in that lack of spiritual conversation is that when tragedy happens, when something unexpected and painful comes into your life, if you haven't had those easy conversations about this is in this family, right? If you haven't had those conversations on a regular basis, just as part of what we do as a family, then how do you sit down and talk through the kind of pain that, because my family has navigated that. And I know the two of you know that, when my oldest was a senior, she had a very difficult experience with a friend dying, and she was present for it. And it was by definition traumatic and a tragedy for our family. And we sat on the floor so many times, and we would joke about, why do we always find ourselves on the floor? But it was like, it was almost like that's where we were brought to. Like we had nowhere else to go but just to sit down and dig in and talk about how it's okay to question God. It's okay
to be angry.
And it's okay to say things like, we had a daughter who was born, raised, educated in the faith at a Christian school, had dug into all of these type of conversations with us, who sat on the floor with us and said, I don't really feel God, and it's like, boy, it takes your breath away as a parent. But you have to be able to have that foundation of, okay, we can have this hard conversation because we have talked about how God ebbs and flows in our lives, and the presence of him is always there, even when we don't have the clarity to see it.
And it's so crucial to set that foundation, because what is your deepest hope as a parent, as a grandparent, as a mentor for youth, is to be there for them in the tough
Right.
times. And so if you want to be able to be there and comfort them and walk with them through struggles, which I would hope is one of
goal,
our
right.
deepest goals, then you have to have the credibility of having laid that foundation.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't had those kind of conversations and you find yourself walking through a mess, it's going to feel so insincere
Yeah.
that now suddenly God comes into the picture. Where has he been this whole time if he's really a part of your life that I should
Yeah.
look to? And so it was convicting for me, like, oh man, yes, we need to see
Right.
God in the highs and the lows, the big and the small. And I just need to bring him into the conversation, which is scary and daunting, which is
Right.
another reason I love this book, because there are so many tangible, application steps that they give us a little later in the chapter.
And I want to spend a little time then too, because again, I had a friend in seminary. This is going to sound inappropriate, but I'm not saying something inappropriate. That would often say to folks, we don't need to should on people, right?
Yeah.
SHOULD,
should.
Yeah.
right? Because we all know what we should be doing,
Right.
But when we tell people you should be doing this, it feels like you're
Yeah.
It's a guilt trip, and that
Judgy.
doesn't motivate anybody.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so there's a layer to which I want to pause to also like acknowledge, right? That's a beautiful moment that you shared, Tracy, of that's what it built toward. But I know, at least when I look at my own life, this is an area where like I've had to learn what this means, right? So I do think when I look back, like in my childhood, we were probably, well, I almost want to go certainly, but again, that's not to be offended by or shocked by not having spiritual conversations, but I want to say, like, I relate to folks that don't have the spiritual conversations or don't feel like they have the tools to have
Right.
spiritual conversations. And maybe I think it's been more formed just by my years in student ministry now, or my years of working with families, in that, like, growing up, like, having we went to church, we went to Bible study, but how much did we really talk about it?
Right.
And there's a layer to which I was so, by sixth grade or something like that, I was so interested in it that I was the one asking the questions, right? Whether
Starting
that
the
was of my
conversation.
pastor or my Sunday school leaders or something like that. But when it came to my actual family, we didn't talk about hard things. That was not a characteristic of the Hove household growing up. If you had things that you really wanted to talk about, we're thankful for other people in your life. Right? And there's a layer
Yeah.
to which I think that is a very normal, and again, it goes somewhat to, in the last chapter, we had the thermostat, you can set it and that's comfortable, and someone else feels like they're in control. And I can tell you, like, that the table is a very good metaphor for ministry and ministry conversations that we get to have. They're unpredictable. We don't have all the right answers and things like that. But I was wondering if we could get a little bit of we're on the same team here for our listeners too, of if
Oh,
this
yeah.
is you, this is my experience too.
I mean, I think that all families, if you've raised kids and if you haven't raised kids, you've been a kid, and you know that families are inconsistent and messy and have a lot of shoulds where
Yeah,
we're like, man,
yeah.
we should have done that, And I think that's a normal place to exist. And on the outsides of that, either below that bar or above that bar, is where we typically find ourselves, right? We're very, very rarely right in the middle where we want to be. And it's okay, if you find yourself in a place where you've gone weeks and months without having a conversation about faith and where you are in that, whether it's good or bad. I think just start looking, start asking yourself, who do I feel connected to that I could reach out to and have coffee with, or sit down with a mom that has kids my kids' age, and
Absolutely.
just start saying, hey, where are you guys in your walk on this? Like,
Yeah.
what do you
What
talk
works
to your
for
kids
you? And-
about? Yeah, for sure. Because and I think your spouse is a big point when you brought up that so few spouses were having those conversations together. I think that just lends to why we see so much divorce when things hard happen in life. When you have a sick kid, when you have a death, when you have a loss of a job. Statistically, we know that those things tend to divide marriages. And it's because you're missing those conversations. And so there's never a wrong place to start, right? Like, just
Like when you know what you want to have in your
Yeah.
family, when you see like, I want to be able to be there for my kids when they go
Yeah.
through hard stuff. I want to be able to be an anchor, be something to lean on. And I want my kids to be able to see me walk, and be messy, but also trust in the Lord.
right.
Yeah, that's
it.
That's the motivator for, okay,
Right.
how do I lay that foundation? For sure.
Yeah, and I think that's where I love like Don's chapter. Again, he gave us a scenario where he was in college and riding in the car with his dad. His dad kind of dropped a question
Yes.
of, and the question was just simply,
Yeah.
it was something similar. This was the situation for anybody that didn't read it. He was driving in the car. He said, "Where do you want to eat?" And he said something along the lines of, "I don't know.
It's
That's
not
not important to me." And the dad said, "Well, what is important to you?" So like softball, here's a good
Open the
opportunity for
door.
conversation. College kid, really
Yes.
navigating through everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Don tells us he didn't take it. He didn't take the invite. He kind of shrugged it off as an I don't know, because that's a vulnerable moment and he wasn't used to conversations like that with his dad and so on and so forth. And so I think he kind of eases us in there because again, this is why I love this book, is it helps us all. If you don't have anything, if you feel like you have no starting point at all, you don't even know where to go, Don invites you to that place. And he starts by giving us some findings, right?
Yeah.
And so I found these findings, they related to, if you listened to us in the last episode, they related and correlated pretty well to what we saw there. But number one was just simply, don't put so much pressure on yourself that it has to be spiritual. And I know that
Oh,
sounds
right.
strange to some people that's
No.
coming from a pastor, but it was basically the trend that they saw in this Barna research with people is the more spiritually vibrant homes were the ones that were actually just vibrant homes,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So conversations of faith and relating to God and prayers and things like that happen more often with families that just did things together.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like it comes out of those other mundane activities.
Like
Mhm.
shockingly that, God's design for people that live life together and
Right.
care for each other,
Yeah,
that
just
would produce
works.
something spiritual because, hey,
Yes.
that's his design. Oh,
Yeah.
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
that's the thing, is just going on walks, just eating around a table.
Eating
Yeah.
together without phones.
Yes.
Yep.
I mean, all these different things kind of breeds towards that. And that was one that always sticks out to me when I think back to this. And it was cool. Finding number 2 of this chapter was they found that conversations typically do happen around a table. So when there's food
Mhm.
Yeah.
involved, and that's funny to me because that's one of the secrets it's not even a secret of student ministry.
Right.
Mhm.
Like if you want kids, you'll have food,
Yeah.
right? And if
Yeah.
you don't have food, good luck getting any children. And if you do have kids there and you don't have food, good luck getting them to talk. But if
Right.
you get food in their mouths, like,
They
it's
will.
similar to all of us, right? I mean, who doesn't
Yeah.
who doesn't like come to a party with a bunch of tacos or something like that,
Right.
or Chick-fil-A, right? So and then once you're there, you're happy. There's a satisfaction
comfort,
to it.
yeah.
There's a trust to it too when you share a meal with people.
I had to laugh because about the table in my family growing up, we had kind of a formal living room and we didn't hang out there much, but if there was a serious talk to be had, it was
Oh,
always
fun.
in what my parents referred to as the blue room because it had blue carpet. And that was like the things are going down room, right? Like we knew,
okay.
we knew there was going to be, a serious conversation had if it was, we're going to have a meeting in the blue room, So
Mhm.
I don't know what it was, but that room also kind of over the years would invite you to be like, okay, more vulnerable, like open, like
Oh,
where this
interesting.
is going to be where the things are
'Cause
being
it's
talked about
serious.
here.
That's
yeah.
so interesting.
And
The
I don't know.
environment. That's a-
yeah.
it
It was
just
just
points-
what my parents kind of. I don't even know if it was intentional or it was just kind of set apart for more family communication like that.
I like that you just said set apart because I do think environment plays a big role. They mentioned again just the statistics of like a spiritually vibrant home tends to feel a certain way,
Right.
that people feel comfortable, casual, peaceful but fun, and so that environment is important, and whether that environment is made kind of sacred or set apart
Right.
because of the weight and the importance of those conversations. That happens when we know, okay, it's time for meals. We put our phones away so that we can engage. Or, hey, Don shares later on some examples of how you can get to a deeper level of conversations with people, and it's
Mhm.
by going out one-on-one. So you
Right.
take your kid out with you, and you go and you have coffee, or maybe not coffee with your kids.
Chick-fil-A.
But yeah, you go out and you have some intentional one-on-one time together. So setting that environment is an important part of those
Right.
conversations.
And I'd say a piece of that environment is the time, right?
Yes.
So if you set aside the time, because I think back, I was the third of 4 kids, right? So by the time I was hitting sophomore year, junior year of high school, they'd been through the ringer with 2 of them, right? So I was kind of leftovers, so to speak. And then you have my little brother that got the ultimate leftovers, and so to speak. But there was a layer to which I found myself at a certain point, probably by the time I hit freshman year of high school, I found myself kind of jealous of other families that sat around a table to eat because our schedules were so crazy
Yeah.
that we never sat in the same place. And most of the time, I mean, typical, it's funny because I look back on my life now and I'm like, how do you deal with a long day? And like, you'll go and you'll probably eat and it's going to be with a TV show on because that's what happened in my household growing up. Like once everybody did finally make it back, they grabbed food from the kitchen because everybody was eating at different times and you went into the living room and you ate. But those times when we actually chose to sit around the table were super valuable for all of us because we remember what it was like when we were kids. And so you mentioned your special room, and I thought of how we had like the dining room. There's the kitchen table, but then there was the dining room, and that was for special occasions like Christmas, Easter, occasionally Thanksgiving if we weren't traveling to see families. And here's what I found as we got older, college, seminary days, those special meals were very difficult to start the conversation because we were so
out of
not
practice.
used to
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was kind of fascinating to me. And what was funny as I was reading this too is, and he said, finding number 2, right? It happens around tables. I remember as a middle schooler, high schooler, reading through the Harry Potter books. And I remember the table in the Black house, right? Sirius Black's house. And I remember telling myself, I want a table like that.
Right.
I want a table that's big enough for that many people to fit around and have the conversations because there's that longing within me for something like that. And I wonder how true that is for so many of our people. And so that's the thing is, again, thinking about these baby steps, consider what it means to just don't pressure yourself with the spiritual side yet, but just to sit around a table and start having meals,
Yeah.
and really and truly. And I go on a flashback to my, I believe it was either my junior or senior year of college. There was a speech contest. And I was like, why not? There was cash prize. I was like, I was an English major. Like, I'll try my luck. And the topic was food. Okay. and I ended up titling my speech, Take a Seat. Okay. And basically what I did was I had found tons of stats about how people don't even sit down for meals anymore and all this other stuff, but then also related it to like how to read literature like a professor. And if you ever have a book that has a meal scene, it's a very important thing because it's actually a theological reason. It's the idea of communion.
Yeah.
But the reason why it's important is because it's incredibly difficult to write a scene around a table. Like there's other exchanges and all this other stuff that can be pretty easy to do. But like all this to say, like, and it was funny because like you do 2 presentations of the speech. The first round to weed out everybody and then the final round. And first round, I was like, I'm probably not making it through, but I made it through by the skin of my teeth. And then the next morning I woke up and like recited it from memory somehow. And I went and presented it and ended up doing very well. But it was kind of it resonated with people. They're like, people don't talk about this stuff. If everybody else was choosing like how we make our food, all this other stuff. And I just chose the general topic of sitting down and having conversation because it is so meaningful and so deep. And so even just taking that step. And one of the other findings that relates to this was bringing other people in.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
What was the wording of it? Spiritual friendships are important, but then also number 4 was spiritual coaching helps. And so the idea behind that is don't just think of your family, but I mean, this is really important, especially for anybody listening that's more in that mentor role or seeing something, or even a grandparent that goes along with the coaching side of things, of just someone else that's there that has Jesus on the brain, who follows Jesus and is mindful, because that's just going to change the way you interact with everybody in general.
Yeah.
And so being able to have those moments and interact and invite those people around the table just to be a part of your life, because I really do think we're in like the loneliest age of human history that we've ever been. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, clearly I didn't read the book. But picking up from what you guys are talking about around the table and stuff, I think about where I'm at right now with 2 little ones at home. And by the time both of them get to bed, it's like 9 o'clock sometimes, and my wife and I look at each other and go, "Hi."
Yeah. Amen to
How's
that.
it going? Do you want to watch a 3-hour Batman movie, or do you want to talk? Let's talk. So we catch up, and it is good to enjoy that time, and we try to make that something that we do at least a few times a week. But it gets tough because
Yeah.
also at the end of the day, I come home and just like you were saying, you're tired, and it's like, just I need some food. Okay, let's sit down. Okay. But to do all that, and I'm also making like 3 different meals because we have a picky eater and a baby and
Yeah.
us. So there's also it's that time of life. So I'm not having those deep conversations
Mm-mm.
yet with the little ones, but hearing you guys talk about it is
Yeah.
very encouraging, and I'm excited for that. Terrified for sure, but excited for that
Yeah.
as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
because
fun
and that's the thing
stuff.
is the baby steps are so important,
Yep.
right? And metaphorically speaking,
Yeah.
but it's like and then that's the thing is you guys think about that what that means. Like, I mean, bringing family over, bringing friends over, like even in the mess. So like it's this book we read it with DCEs in the fall, and so the Houston area DCEs, and I had a young mom that's a DCE. I think she has some in elementary school, but some littler ones. And she was talking about actually how they open up their home. She's a pastor's wife, and they open up their home on Thursday nights, I think. And she kind of said, like, any Thursday, just come on by. It's open doors, because she's kind of embracing that concept
Wow.
of come see our messy life, right?
Yeah.
Come be invited into my messy world because it's going to be good for my kids. And that's so
Yeah,
true.
that's
Like
cool.
when I think about it, like, I don't know about you guys, but like I think about my childhood, and like I loved being able to go to other people's houses. I loved it when other people came into my house because it was kind of like,
Right.
welcome to my world. And I'm sure my parents were terrified because there were 4 of us,
Yeah.
right? But there was a layer of like that. It was so spiritually redeeming for me as a child that we weren't just by ourselves, you
Yeah.
know? And so like for us adults, we kind of have to shoulder that fear of
Mhm.
what other people are going to think, and just say, I know this is good for my child.
And to that, and to what Kyle was sharing about having little kids, I feel like the meal time for me right now in my life, because I have a 6, almost 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 10-month-old. Meal time is survival. And it's, no, we're not
Yeah.
talking now. You are going to eat food because otherwise we're going to be here for an hour, and I
We
want to
have
load the
business
dishwasher.
to
And
do.
yeah, like, and all I long for with my kids is to have good conversations.
Yeah.
But I find myself in task mode during mealtime.
Yeah.
Get the food on the table, help everybody eat, make sure the 5-year-old stays focused and finishes his food. And no, you can't have a treat until this is done. And and I have squashed the table. I have removed it as an opportunity
Yeah.
for conversations with my kids. So I'm not saying, no holds barred, they can eat whatever they want and have a 2-hour meal. But I'm recognizing in myself that I need to shift or adjust my expectations for their age level so that mealtime can be something that we enjoy, not something that they dread because they know they have to come to the table and they have to stay until they clean their plate and
Right.
and that means I might have to do the dishes a little bit later at night, or I might have to say, okay, well, we're all done with our meal. You hang out here until you're done. I might have to just give on some of those
Yeah.
things if I really want this to be a part of our family time, because I find that table time is one of the most stressful times in my
Oh,
house.
wow. And do you know where it's funny as y'all are talking, and especially as you were talking to Melanie, I was like, I've kind of already cut my teeth in this area, even though I have no children. Do you
Yeah.
know where? Summer camp, right?
Ah.
So
Yeah.
you have a very, very tiny window
Short window.
where these
Yeah.
kids can eat. And
Yeah.
I had 5-year-olds, I had 7-year-olds. When I was in Maine, I had 10-year-olds. And we were actually trained for how to do lunchtime. I'm
Yeah.
not even kidding you.
Yeah.
The method.
And I remember particularly in Maine, they would say you have this side of a window, you need to make sure your kids are eating, because if they're not eating, we're going to get in trouble with their parents and all this other stuff, right? And so, but there was a layer to it. You learned how to have, especially as the camp counselor, having fun. Now, I will say, right, I did not have the pressure of preparing the food. I did not have the pressure
Cleaning.
of cleaning up afterward. So, but like you were sitting at a table, and there was 2 of you and 6 kiddos. And it was a matter of making sure everybody had food on their plate,
Yeah.
and being able to say things like, you need a little more color on that plate, go figure it out. And then also
Yeah.
just talking about their day.
Yeah.
Because you weren't going to see them again until later that night. And then at dinner, being able to process their day while also doing the same thing. And then somehow finding, so it's funny, like if you ever do eat with me, you'll notice I eat really quickly,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I devour
You
it.
have
And
to.
it's because of all those years of being a camp
Yeah.
counselor, I had no choice.
Right.
Like if I wanted food, I had to consume it as quickly as possible because I was so busy dealing with everything else. But like I wonder to what extent maybe that can help some of our parents that are thinking about this, like
Yeah.
especially if you're
Yeah.
able to partner with your spouse and say, all right, I'm camp counselor tonight. You're like
Yeah,
prepping
right.
and you're cleaning.
Yeah.
Take
You know, and
roles.
take the swap it up. You know, maybe that's a possibility.
I
And
like
that
that.
way there's the pressure is not on you to do it
Right,
all.
right.
Mhm.
Because even the conversation was just easier, like when you knew you had somebody helping you do it and were watching, and you didn't feel like you had all of it
Oh,
at one
that's
time.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And then bring a friend over. So
Yeah.
if you're, that's the thing is if you're the cook and the chef, like bring over a friend and say, I need you to play camp counselor. Like,
Yeah.
You know, like you
Yeah.
can say that to
Right.
them. And I think
I
that's
love
kind of
that.
just a fun way to be able to do that. And like, especially when we think about like it talked about spiritual coaching. And so what does that mean? Whether that's like instruction or just mentioning God or
Mhm.
asking a question
Mhm.
or encouraging someone, just
Mhm.
encouraging is spiritual, right?
Yeah.
That's a spiritual thing that we do. Talking about church, just in general, like encouraging the participation with God's people. That's what church means. Forgiveness, the Bible, traditions, like whatever it is, that's where spiritual coaching, and that is, every one of us has been a part of a team before,
Mhm.
and so a coach is someone outside of the team, right? So this
Oh,
myth
yeah.
of freedom, this myth of control, this
Mhm.
myth of autonomy, get rid of it. Get rid
Yeah.
of it and allow someone else to come in and help and join a team, be on a team, and
Yes.
even invite someone to be a coach, right? I think that was just a beautiful, beautiful picture. And then the final finding, at least before we kind of get into the real good stuff of the 3 steps,
Mhm.
the 3 layers to think about when you're just starting out. The final one was that some struggle more than others. And so
Mhm.
again, I'm looking a little closer. This is my 3rd time through this book, and it parallels a lot of the last chapter
Mhm.
in the sense of it talked about how spiritual vibrancy was easier for young kids with messy prayers, right?
Yep.
There's a layer to which that resonated true in this chapter. The way they phrased it, though, was some struggle more than others, pointing out adult children households. So
Mhm.
grown-up kids, the grown-up nuclear family struggled a little more to have real conversations. Um, Dads, right? You guys got a lot of attention again, and that dads are not typically the conversation people and the spiritual, and that just means, hey, you're not alone, right?
Yep.
Right.
But I think we all have work to do, and maybe dads even can think of themselves as a team. Like, how do we lead our families? How do we grow in what it means to have conversations? Start with your spouse. Make it easier. Start with friends. Whoever it is that you need to
Yeah.
start with somebody to have a spiritual conversation. So that, and the more that you have those conversations, the better it's gonna be. And then the other one, which I mean, so it's funny because we started off with technology, this generation, but the last one, boomers, right?
Yeah.
So the boomer generation also struggles deeply with having spiritual conversations. And I laugh at that because my household was built by, or I was raised by boomers, right? And so I can see that. And at the same time, like I have enjoyed growing with my parents, like, and again, especially by the time I was crossing the river out of high school into college, into real life, and learning what it meant to have deeper conversations with my parents. And a lot of times, me as a kid inviting those conversations because I wanted them, as I think all
Yeah.
of us do. And I found all those findings just kind of deeply. Any of those findings particularly resonate with you guys?
Yeah, I think that some people struggle more with conversation hit me because I do find that my husband struggles more with things that he perceives as being something that sees our hurt in our kids, right?
Mm.
Like maybe when they're having pain, it's hard for him. He struggles a little bit more in that area, I think. And I think it's just a visible, maybe that protective model, that like when they're hurting and if I can't fix it, if I don't have, I don't know, because I'm not a dad, but I see that in him some that he wants to make it go away or to fix. And I think for some moms, we get accustomed to sitting in the discomfort
Mhm.
because it's
That's
kind of a
sometimes all you
daily
can. Yeah.
thing,
Mm,
when you're in the trenches of raising kids, sometimes that's all you got in a day. So, but for him, I do see that it's hurtful for him. Like he hurts when they're hurting,
Yeah.
if they're sharing something that's painful. And so that doesn't always come natural, I guess maybe is my point. And so when it says conversations can just be tougher for some people, I think it's important to know who's in your life and who you rely on and what's tough for them, and vice versa. If you have a kid, some kids aren't just natural sharers.
Yes.
Mhm.
Somewhere I was trying to thumb through, but on 119 it says, which of the members of your household would you consider eager conversationalists, right? And you should probably just know. I have one kid who would tell me every mundane detail of her life, and I have another kid who I have to probe and be like, not just, how was your day? Fine.
Right.
Like, I think that, and if you want to truly come together as a kind of a nuclear, let's sit down and have these kind of conversations, you have to know if it's tough for somebody, because that's part of bringing them into or around the table, maybe.
Well, and as you talk about Jeff, I'm sitting there going, one, doesn't that show us how our Heavenly Father feels too when we're hurting, right?
Yeah,
So there's a little bit of
empathy.
empathy there that he's wired dads in such a way. And then two, though, I think it's okay to hurt, right? Because there's a layer to which I'm like, if he didn't hurt, I'd question him, right?
Right.
So I think all those kind of play a level to it. But I like that it's just generally being aware of your own household and knowing your own household. And again, putting down the technology a lot of times, turning off the TV, just to sit down and get to know each other. Do I even know the people in my own household?
Yeah.
It's kind of a thing, because I think a lot of times people come into the church, the people of God, right? I always clarify that, because I think lately too,
That's
saying the
building.
word church means a building or
Building,
something
yeah.
like that. And I think a lot of the hurt people experience coming into our doors of not feeling welcomed or seen is actually tracing back to their own experiences in the home. I mean, especially looking at this, if 75% of our people are not talking at home and they're coming to gather with the people of God, right? Coming to church, and they don't get a meaningful conversation there either, no wonder, right? They're hurting. No wonder they have a false,
Right.
or not false, but a dark sense of the church, or
Unmet expectations.
and it hurt. I mean, it
Yeah.
hurts, the best probably way I can say it. Yeah, no wonder if we're not even able to do that here. And so there's a layer to which I'm like, y'all, we got to get this home
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. And I do, like I mentioned before, I do think that it's easier to figure out how to get that home when pieces aren't falling apart, So it's good to think
Fair.
about, like, if you're listening and life seems really good, now's the right time, right? If everything is going well and you don't see these like fractures or these chasms in your relationships and your family, now is the time to start this practice.
And yeah.
Don't wait until there is that
Till you're
chasm,
drowning, yeah.
right? Because then it's really hard, and then you don't have the practice of saying, I know this is tough, and I know we're all going to have some pain in this conversation, but it's necessary,
And to that too, though, to the person with tears streaming down their face right now, hearing that, right? Because life is tough, and life's been tough for a few years. Like, they also need to know they're not alone, right?
Right.
That's
Oh,
one
yes.
of those, that myth of the autonomy.
Absolutely.
God didn't intend you to be autonomous. He has people here willing to walk
Absolutely.
alongside of you, willing to talk with you, willing to help you. And that's where I really appreciate the steps Don lays out for us. And what do those baby steps look like? So the metaphor of the day is the table. It's not a fire this time.
Right.
And so he talks about it as a meal, right? That's the
Yeah.
metaphor. So you start with the light, right? The appetizer, the
Appetizer.
salad, the soup, and then you go to, he calls it the light fare is the first one. Then you go to the steady diet. You have the meat, the potatoes, and
Balanced
then
meal.
eventually to the rich dessert, right? And so I
Yes.
think a lot of times that's the thing, is we have conversations like this and people are like, we got to get there. It's like, no,
No,
no, no, no,
friend,
no.
Like,
Yeah.
if we started at dessert, we all
Yeah.
know what you were told as a kid.
Right.
right?
You're not gonna
You
eat
can't
your
have
dinner.
dessert until you finish your plate,
Yeah.
right? And to some extent too, like,
Right.
there's a level of warm up and all this stuff. And I love food. I know your family
Yeah.
loves food. I mean, who doesn't love food?
Yeah.
So I really appreciated this metaphor too, though, of, because I think about a meal like that. I think about where there is an entree, or there
Right.
is there is an appetizer or a salad or a soup, and it goes all the way to a dessert. And what does that mean? If you have 3 courses,
It paces your dinner.
paces your dinner.
Yep.
You're going to need to dedicate an amount of time. This is
Yeah.
not
Mhm.
this is not sitting
Yeah.
around a camp table
not
devouring
fast
it
food.
in 20
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah.
Right? It's not my
Right.
beloved
isn't-
Chick-fil-A.
No.
It's yeah, it's
It's paced.
time.
Yep.
It is time. All right. So light fare, All right, let's introduce into that one.
Well, I think the biggest theme of the table that I noticed was you can't force anyone to eat. You can
Yes.
only invite. So for those of you just so deeply desiring to have these spiritual conversations or just any conversations because you feel like your family is, disconnected or that like the, media's in the way, whatever it might be, your job is to invite and set the table.
Mhm.
And I believe that God will be faithful to provide that appetite. The Holy Spirit's at work, and so you just keep on inviting and setting the table, and God will be faithful. But yeah, I love the idea of the lighter fare because this is anything and everything goes, right? This is you can have the conversations about silly things that you saw.
Right.
I told my kids, my son was just having a kind of a rough day, like he just was in an off mood. And he had been going to soccer with his dad. And so then I picked him up and I was like, hey, you want to know what happened to me? We went and got donuts and I was loading baby brother in the car. I put my donut on top of the car and then I left it there.
Nice.
And my donut blew away in the wind. And like, do you think some birds ate it? I'm telling my 5-year-old son. And he's like, oh, I don't know if birds ate it. I'm like, do you think it got smushed by a big giant truck? And he just laughed. And then he wanted to tell everybody about the donut. And it was like, okay, like this silly, dumb, insignificant thing
Mhm.
opened a little door for him because I shared something that was funny. So this lighter fare really can be anything goes. For whatever age your kids are at, it truly is a softball, an easy thing to start. So I love that it's not an intimidating thing.
Absolutely.
It's like the peach in the pit, like
Mhm.
just having
Your
kids
highs and
start
lows.
that conversation of what was great today and what was not so great today. And that's something that you can start so young. Like
Mhm.
2-year-olds get that,
And
you
that-
know?
what was so interesting to me though too is the highs and lows wasn't something that came out until the
Right.
meal,
I
right? So
know.
even
Oh, yeah.
so again, to me that's that's so freeing.
Mhm.
Right, because
Mhm.
someone might be listening to this like highs and lows. That's really my kid doesn't answer me. Blah blah blah. I was like, start with something else.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
like you said,
Right.
start with the donut conversation. And I think the other thing, like trying to pair up the findings with the light fare,
Mhm.
you're on a team, right?
Yep.
Find a partner, right? So whether or not that's your spouse or maybe
Mhm.
you're a single parent and you have that friend that's able to come out. Because think about it, even the goal, like notice what it said. The goal at the very beginning was just once a week.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the goal is just once a week. And so even being able to set aside time, and maybe it is terrifying to bring someone into your house right now. So go to
Yeah.
Chick-fil-A, invite someone to come along with a friend, grandparents, whatever it is, to come with you and be that partner. Say, hey, this is my goal. I know my kids need this, or your
Mhm.
spouse, and say, look, our kids need this. So
Right.
like, even though I'm the one playing camp counselor tonight, like I need
Yeah.
you to engage when the kids aren't, right? I need
Yeah.
us to be able to talk and have lighthearted, fun
Right.
conversations and things like that. When you think about the light fare going on.
In
Go ahead.
addition to the highs and lows, one that I've always enjoyed is a would you rather question.
Oh, yeah.
They're just
Absolutely.
silly, ridiculous questions, but whether it's to get a conversation starting in my classroom or around the
Right.
table, like it's just fun to
Yeah.
hear. So
And
like,
just Google those. I
yeah.
mean, that's-
And you get list after list after list. So it's like, would you rather have cheesy Cheeto fingers forever or a kernel of popcorn stuck in your teeth forever? And you have to
Yeah.
decide like, oh, I really love Cheetos,
Such
but
a
do I
hard
want them all over
question,
my
right?
clothes?
Exactly,
And you just
exactly.
get those, again, you just get the conversation started.
And I would say use the word for kids when you do
Mhm.
would you
Oh,
rather
yes,
questions
yes.
online. You Google that. But it talked
I'll
about
think
not
of
just
any-
around a table, but stories, questions, even.
Yeah.
Just short little questions. Like again, even that what's important to you is kind of a little deep one, but
Mhm.
like what was your I mean, again, I go back to highs and lows too,
Yeah.
peaches and pits. Like, but what was your favorite part of today?
Yeah.
Or why was it your favorite? Or
Yeah.
what's your favorite color? Or just knowing general things like that. Talked about the shared drive.
Mm.
Right, the shared drive, like that's an opportunity for one of these conversations. It doesn't have
The
to be
commute.
around a table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the cloud, the commute.
There you
Yeah.
go. Oh yes,
It's like, wait, what?
nice. There you go. Shared drive, Google Drive. Yeah.
My
Um,
dad always had a thing at dinner. He'd say, "What'd you learn today?"
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And when
yeah.
we got into, inviting friends over, sometimes boyfriends, I come from a house of all girls. So if we had somebody at dinner with us, he would ask them.
Yeah.
And if they happened to say nothing, it was a a very open door for my dad to be like, really, you learned nothing today, you know, and it would usually end up with the person being very intentional about never saying nothing again,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So it was like the next dinner would be like, okay, I know what I learned today. I'm ready for Harry. You know,
That's
it's like I'm
so
ready for it.
funny.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other piece of the life fair was the encouragement too. So
Yeah.
even that, just encouraging someone and you're encouraging these kiddos, they need it all the time, like finding that space to be able to do that. Stepping into the steady diet, the
Mhm.
entree, if you will.
Meat and potatoes.
Again, that goal was the weekly check-in, right? The meal after church maybe is a great opportunity for that, like because it's kind of fresh on the brain, just to be able to talk about what you heard in church today. Like that's a little bit deeper of a level to talk.
And usually Sundays are a day when we don't have the schedule conflicts.
Oh,
So
good.
making
Yeah.
that plan, yeah.
And then I think the other layer to it, I mean, we already mentioned highs and lows, but the other one it mentioned was asking what can we pray for today or something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Like that's a little basic
Yeah.
intro question to where to go.
Yeah. And I think for me, I found, and sometimes I wonder how Jeff felt about this as a dad, because it was very much me and my girls' time, but it was late at night, like before bed. They're tired. The guards are kind of down, right? They've finished all of their stuff for the day, the homework, the dinner, the, you know, all the conversations with friends. Everything is kind of quieted. And that was when I would say, like, tell me about today, you know, or what's going on tomorrow. Let's talk about what you have on your schedule tomorrow. And it was no TV. It was quiet. It was a very quiet conversation, if that makes sense. But I would learn so much about my kids in those late night quiet conversations, you know, like, and they often ended in prayer, like, you know, okay, well, let's say a prayer and you get a good night's sleep and I'll see you in the morning. And it was like, that became something. And when my kids left, oh man, I missed that. Like, it was like, that was the first thing I would think, like, it's late at night. I'm a night owl. And so it was like, it's crickets around here. And I don't, you know, so my kids and I still FaceTime at night a lot late, you know. It's nothing for my FaceTime to go off at 10:30 or so. Like, what are you doing? Because they know I'm up. But that's a good part of the day, because it is kind of like everything has fallen away maybe. You know, those right before bed, it just seems like your defenses may be down a little.
Sure. And that I love that you found something that worked for your schedule, your girls, what they needed, and, you know, having gotten through the day and getting through some of those things and then having the guards down. I've found, like, I really wanted to have conversations during my drive with my kids.
Sure, yeah.
And my one son is just totally available for that. He's all about it, gets in the car, he's ready to talk. My daughter, on the other hand, I figured out a little bit more about her personality, and she gets done with her day at school and she needs some time to decompress.
Sure, yeah.
And so, and you know, when things are heated or like she's frustrated about something and I'm like, oh, honey, how do you feel? That's not what she needs from me.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that not everybody's going to respond to your invitation in the way that you might expect.
Right.
But it might be about shifting the environment, shifting the time frame, giving
absolutely.
some space, you know, just not necessarily handling things in the heat of the moment. I'm the type that wants to dig in and talk through it. I don't want to leave something untouched if I know it's a problem. But my daughter, God bless her, she's almost 7, and she's telling me, I don't want to talk about it right now.
Right.
And I'm respecting that, because I'm recognizing, it's not going to go well if we talk right now. So figuring out that your family dynamic, even the dynamics between you and other specific members in your household, whether that's your extended household like we've been talking about, or within your family unit, it's okay that it looks different with different people.
Oh, for sure.
And it's important that you're sensitive to how they function and how they communicate, and that you don't take it personally.
And again, kind of piggybacking on sticky faith to an extent, that like you mentioned with this one, it's about setting the table. So your daughter says to you, I don't want to talk about it right now. There's a layer to say, okay, just, you know, this is important to me.
Yeah.
So I need you to let me know when we're going to talk about this.
Exactly. Yes.
You know?
Yep.
And if I don't hear from you,
I'll check
by
back.
tomorrow, I'm going to check back with you.
Yep.
You know, just so she knows, like, mom's not going to let this go.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and we're going to talk about it, because I do think there's that tendency to just avoid or not.
That's probably
I
just
don't
in
want it.
general the best parenting tip ever, right? Lee has it and he doesn't have kids. Don't let it go. Like, make sure you're always checking back in on those things that seem uncomfortable, because there's a reason that it's uncomfortable, and they need you to guide them in those times, but they don't always know how to verbalize, I need you to guide
Absolutely.
me.
And that phrase, I mean, I use that phrase very intentionally.
Yeah.
This is important to me.
Yeah.
Right? When you're able to say something like that, and when your kids are able to say that to you, I
Mhm.
hope you train your kids to say, this is important to me because,
Mhm.
again, I've only been a camp counselor and a camp director, but I trained people I worked with to say those words to me so that I knew,
Right.
Yeah.
right? Because otherwise they could say something to me and I think it's like, oh, okay, they just want to talk
Yeah.
about this. I can ignore it,
Right.
until it really happens. But when you're able to say, this is important to me, I'm able to go, you have my full attention.
Yeah.
What do you need from me?
Well, and in the school setting, you coming from high school, Lee works with these so much in middle school. Those kids don't always know how to articulate,
Yes.
I need blank, whatever
Right.
it is. It could be time, space, help. I need support. They don't really know. They just know I'm feeling something that's not feeling good, and I don't know. I don't have all the skills,
Yeah.
but I have this adult sitting across from me asking me questions like, what can I do? How are you doing? Tell me about
I
what's
don't know.
going
But
on.
even as adults, I
Yeah.
don't know how to respond sometimes to that.
Yeah.
Like, what do you need from me? What can I do for you?
Right.
Leave me alone. Like, you
Yeah.
know, like,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the honest
Right.
question answer a lot of times. Or it's like the other really honest question I have, or answer I have to that question a lot of times is, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And that's the same thing with our kids.
That's okay.
Like, I don't know what I
Yeah.
need right now. I appreciate that you're here for me, but I really have no idea what I need right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a slight side note, again, with these communication things, it's such a learning curve. It's such a process with every individual that you encounter. So another thing that I'm learning about my daughter that's different than my son is when things feel heavy for her, whether she's, upset about getting in trouble or there's something that's frustrating to her, she will avoid eye contact. And for my husband and I, originally that was a big thing because we want eye contact. That's respect. That's showing me that you're
Mhm.
listening. And for her, it's physically
Overwhelming.
for her to maintain eye contact when she's upset. So I have to be okay with her style of communication.
Yeah.
When it's tough conversations, I can't force her to turn around and look me in the eyes because then I'm not going to be giving her a safe space to communicate. So sometimes she's on the other side of the room looking in the totally opposite direction, playing with a toy, and I'm just waiting, and that's been a healthier spot actually, even though on
Yeah.
the surface to me, I would say that's not healthy at all. She's not even looking at me. But really, again, like there's just so many things that you're going to learn about the kids that are in your world. And they're all going to be different. They're all going to be unique. They're going to have
Yeah.
different approaches. So it may feel overwhelming, but there's such a benefit to getting to the root of what they need and meeting them where they are.
Yeah, and you called it a learning curve, and
Oh, yeah.
that's a growth opportunity
Yeah.
for her. Like at some point, you're going to be able to have that conversation and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, this is what we're currently doing because it's comfortable, and I love that. I
Yeah.
love that you sharing. Just know where we're going."
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
And
absolutely. Like,
yeah.
honey, you when your teachers are talking to you, they're going to want to see your face.
Yeah.
Or I understand that you're not comfortable right now. Can you tell me that instead of stomping off?
Good. Yeah.
Can
Yeah,
you
exactly.
tell me what you are needing? Do you need time? Okay, can you ask for time? Yeah,
Mhm.
because you're right.
Yeah.
It's a teaching moment for her. But when you dive in with a whole bunch of expectations about how your communication with your kids is going to look, you might get smacked in the face with a communication style that you didn't anticipate.
I've seen way too many times where the parent ends up burning bridges.
Oh yeah, accidentally.
Because
Mhm.
and sometimes it's accidentally, sometimes it's out of complete frustration or complete loss for what to do next or something like that. But it's when you act, it goes back to fruit of the spirit. Folks, if it ain't the fruit of the spirit, avoid it. Like, if it ain't all those things, love, joy, peace,
True.
patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, avoid it. Right? So if it comes out as anger or demand or other thing, not one of us likes being told what to do. Not one of us likes being
Right.
should on, right? So
Yeah.
let's not, right? And so we've talked about life fare, we've talked about the main course. Let's leave with the dessert piece, okay? So this is where I went into those one-on-one conversations. Melanie, you brought that up pretty early in our conversation today. just being able to, at that point, you're so used to having conversations, you actually are able to not just have family conversations, but take your kids out on dates, so to
Yeah.
speak, inviting mentors and friends into your life intentionally for your kiddo. Again, it brings me back to Sticky Faith of that picture of the 5 trusted adults for my kiddo that aren't me, right? And inviting those 5 men to, and it was
Mhm.
I can't remember his chap. What was his first name? The co-author of Sticky Faith with Kara Powell. It's okay.
Oh,
Him.
yeah.
He
That
had
guy.
like this retreat for his son, and invited these 5 men along with him. These people that had been mentors for him when he was 18, because it was this big transition. It was so cool, using special occasions like Christmas, Easter, things
Mhm.
like that, to be able to celebrate, or for my family, 4th of July, to be able to have more deeper things. Letters, right? That's certainly a habit a lot of people take up. Of letters are super uncommon. So what does it mean for me to write a deeper letter to my kid? And if you're not used to, I'll tell you this, right? If you haven't had the light fare or the meal, the letter's gonna be strange to your kiddo.
Mhm.
They're
Mhm.
gonna be like, "What in the world is
Well,
happening?"
one of our practices in middle school at Trinity is to have the parents write letters to the kids at camp. I
Yeah.
mean, and it is, you can see it on some of the kids' faces when they're like almost shocked, like
Yeah.
they don't know what to do with all the
Exactly.
flowing of emotion
Yeah.
shared. And we specifically talk to parents about like, tell your kid about how you feel about them. What do you love about them? And what do you love about God giving them to you? And those are, I think it's so important for kids to know
Mhm.
that you feel those things, and that there is that kind of weight, because a lot of this comes down to these deep conversations are all things that are weight on us, right? Like
Yeah.
what we believe, how do we handle hard situations? Um, what do we tell our kids when things don't go the way they think they should go? And those are all things that parents grapple with and carry a lot of times on our backs. And I think those letters are sometimes ways to maybe shed, to just
Right.
say,
Yeah.
I have all of
Absolutely.
these emotions and these intense feelings about what it means to be your mother or your father.
Mhm.
And I'm going to share that with you in this special way, because it is hard sometimes. But I always say afterwards, have a touch point with them on it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Don't just let the letter be the end of that conversation. Let it be the beginning
Yeah.
of that deeper
And
conversation.
again, I hope people are hearing this, right? This is dessert. Like, this is
Yeah.
the good, the
Yes.
rich stuff. And so those letters are rich. But again, it's one of those, well, one, you can't just give dessert all the time.
Right.
You got to have the other stuff, the engaging of other
Yeah.
pieces of life, the other weekly touch points and things like that, for there really to be a fullness to kind of what's going on here. Yeah. Yeah.
I like the example, go hiking or camping,
Sure.
some
The
sort
trip.
of
Yeah.
extended group activity. We've talked about camp so much, but one thing you may not know about Christian camps is that a lot of times they'll have like family weekends that are offered, where you don't have to necessarily be the spiritual leader, but you and your family can participate as a team
Yeah.
in some led activities and devotions. So that might be something cool to look into if if you are at a point where you're like, okay, we've had the lighter fare, we've had some entrees. I really want to do something to highlight this and give my family room to explore dessert, to just
Yeah.
explore the spirituality. But I'm not totally sure if I can be the facilitator of that conversation. I need some guidance. Maybe something like that would be a good option for your family.
Yeah.
And
And it can be corny to think about, but just a good old road trip
Oh yeah.
with some of those corny parent conversation starters, like
Mhm.
would you rather, or
Yeah.
20 questions, or those games that get kid thinking and talking and communicating. Take the headphones out, put the phones up, and just have a road trip.
Pass the snacks around in the car
Yeah.
because
Audiobook.
food's important.
Yes.
For a kiddo. I remember listening to the tapes about like camp, believe it or not. Like, there was stories for kids, and they were
Yeah.
Jesus stories. Like, it was one of the ways my mom kind of introduced that to us, but they would play them on the long road trips.
Mhm.
They were trying to distract us because there were 4 of us in the car
Yeah.
along with the dogs and all this
Yeah.
other stuff. So it's like, okay, how do we keep their attention? But yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say when you think about those family camping trips or something, also like let them be family camping trips,
Yeah.
right? And when you go
Yeah.
to be a part of that, don't get distracted by the other adults. Don't get distracted by the relationships.
Yeah.
At least know that you're being intentional.
Right.
Like have the goal in front of you when you go on those things. Because I think
Mhm.
that's the other temptation is, I mean, it happens at church
Right.
all the time. Like that we get so distracted by seeing other people that we can relate with that we forget the huge impact we have of involving our kiddos in
Mhm.
our own
Mhm.
conversations, involving them in our
Right.
time that we have together.
Yeah, I agree with that.
What
Yeah.
you thinking, Kyle?
Lots.
Oh, good.
Thought-provoking.
I will jumping back to the whole timing of the conversation, is key. And I figured this out going 6 years into my marriage, and my wife does not want to have conversations early in the morning. That is not
Right.
a
There you
thing
go.
that's
That's a
going to
good
work.
thing to figure
Yes.
out.
I'm a morning person, and she is not. This is something that we now
Yes.
know. And at night, I'm sometimes a piece of meat. I can't. It's just, whew, what were you talking
You're
about? What are we
done.
doing?
Yeah.
What's going on? So finding the right moment for those conversations is like so crucial, but
Yeah.
also finding that they happen naturally a lot
Yeah.
if you
Mm.
don't force it. And sometimes
Yeah.
I get a little too forcey with
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
and trying to be like, oh, let's have, but just letting it be natural. So much can come out of it too, and just
Mhm.
leaving room and space and putting the phones down and
Right.
actually turning the TV off and stuff. Engaging with the children, okay, Hazel, that's enough Bluey for today. Let's let's play something,
Yeah.
And we ended up like that was last night. We ended up playing Bad Guys. That was fun. I kept being the bad guy, and a bunch of other stuff too, and just having fun with the kid. And then it was prayer
Absolutely.
time and bedtime, and then it was 10 o'clock, and I was like, "What just happened?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Those days
Mhm.
are okay too. So going with all this and hearing you guys talk about the conversations you're having with older than mine and a lot older than my kids and your camp counselor experience too. It's like okay, because I see that and hearing it too, and I need to read the book. Pastor gave me the book. I'm gonna read. I tried to read the book, but
Yeah.
it's so hard with the kids and stuff at night, and I can never sit down and actually do it. But I got to read that book because there's just a lot of wealth in here that
Right.
you guys
Mhm.
are bringing forward. So this is very, very important stuff and crucial. So I dig
Yeah.
it. I dig
And
it.
I
I-
appreciate when you're talking about with your wife too, that even setting the table with each other,
Right.
Oh, yeah.
right? Letting it know and even having our own little ground rules of what does it look like. Because I mean, that was one of my favorite things as a kid for the special meals or even just for regular meals was being the one that got to set the table.
Yeah.
Like I loved that,
Mm.
right? And so learning like, okay, the plate goes here, this goes here,
Right.
that stuff goes there. Like, and it wasn't something forced. It was just, oh, I got to serve in that way
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And this, but like the same thing's true for conversation of how we can talk with each other. Like, okay, we're going to talk about this. Like, here's our boundaries. Here's do we agree? Are we on the same page at the same
Yeah.
table? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think that in marriage, that's such an important part, what you just said about there are going to be days where you can't. You just cannot. You do not have the energy when the other person has the energy to have those deep conversations,
Yeah.
unless you happen to just be on the same schedule and the same work,
Yeah.
you had a good day when your husband had a good day, right? Because sometimes I come home and I'm exhausted and I've had a day where my decision making is just done. I can't
yeah.
really work through something else. And he's had a day of kind of quiet reflection at home and he's ready,
Ready to
right?
chat it up,
Because
of course.
we're just on different schedules that way. And vice versa. Some days he's had meeting after meeting after meeting, and I've had time to kind of ponder through something. And then, so I'm ready to talk, but he's not, I think learning that rhythm is just a real saving grace in marriage. Jeff and I have been married 25 years next month. And I would say in those 25 years, there's probably been at least 20 different rhythms of those kind of relationship type of questions, like this is our rhythm this year, this is
Mhm.
where we are. We have breakfast together, or sometimes that doesn't work,
Yeah.
and then we phase into a different rhythm, but just being aware that life changes.
Yep.
Table settings change. We're not
Mhm.
going to be the
Mhm.
same as we were when our kids were your kids' age. Our relationship has necessarily evolved and
Mhm.
changed. And don't be afraid of that, I
Yeah.
guess maybe might be my expert advice on marriage at this point in my life would be don't be afraid of the changes. Like it is going to change. You're going to have different phases of life, different realities, different needs.
Yeah.
and just kind of being able to walk through that, knowing that this too shall pass. If it's not real comfortable, or if one person is having more stress in work or things, it passes, and you come back to that table where things feel better and more comfortable.
And you're not alone.
Yeah.
Not alone,
Right? You got a
Right.
tribe. I mean, that's the thing with all these kids, they all have a tribe. And that's the thing is, like, especially when they're younger, yeah, it's probably more centered in the home. But even then you can have the tribe. But as they get older, the tribe is so necessary as they learn what it means to become dependent rather than independent on you. Or
Other way around, yeah.
Other way around. Yeah, good job.
Yeah.
But independent rather than dependent on you.
Yeah.
Then it's so much more important for them to learn what it means to interact and go through too. And I think the way Don ends the chapter, he spends a good number of pages doing it. But,
He does.
But I summarize it saying, Jesus wants this for you. Like
Mhm.
God always intended this for you. And I love, we didn't even get into it, y'all. My favorite, I want these verses hanging on my wall.
Oh, you told me about that. Yeah.
It's a dream of mine. These words that I command you, Deuteronomy
Yeah.
6, verses 6 to 7.
Yep.
These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children and talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise. So he starts
Right.
the chapter with that. It actually, you have the great Shema, a few verses before that. Hear, as your
Yeah.
Lord, your God, the Lord is one. And you have, I want that in my house. I want that
Yeah.
reminder because that's what I want for my house, right? And I'm
Yeah.
single right now, but that's what I want for when people come over to my house. That's what I want for my
Yeah.
house when a family does come my way and things like that. I want us to be a place where we talk and
Yeah.
not just talk, but talk about stuff of meaning, right?
Mhm.
And have conversations, allow God into this space and things like that. And that's kind of how he does. He kind of summarizes by going through and saying, look, this is how God designed you to be able to have these conversations. Again, get rid of that myth of autonomy, get that myth
Yeah.
of freedom, and embrace what God has kind of placed in front of you.
For sure.
Yeah. I love that verse too.
I love that it says the table is set, the food is ready. Everyone in your household is already hungry for this because we were made for intimacy. So even though the goal is the same and the ingredients are the same, the recipe in where you are right now might be different.
Right.
You know, the amount of lighter fare versus entrees versus dessert might be different. It might take you a lot longer in a certain section before you can move on to the next one. And it is like that fire too. You're going to have to kind of go back and, oh yeah, we need some more of this. We need more kindling. So it is a moving, changing, living, ongoing process.
Yes.
And you're not alone. And wherever you are, there are people in your same stage of life. And that's what we're here for, right? That's why we're here. We want to walk with people who want to raise up kids in the faith.
Right.
Absolutely. And it's messy, but we're going to do the best we can, right?
Yep.
With our own encouragement, with our own coaching, with our own community we're trying to build here. We're not perfect,
Right.
not even
Oh,
close
goodness,
to it.
no.
But we are here. So as you guys kind of think about this journey that we're on, email us, raise them up at trinitycline.org. That's RAISEENUP. It's always fun because there's double E's in there, right?
Yes.
And then Trinity Klein, KLEIN.
Correct.
.org. But also you can find us on Facebook, find us on YouTube, subscribe to get the release of everything. So we're excited for that. And we'd love to continue the conversation. I mean, that's kind of why we're here. That's why we wanted to do this in the first place, is so that, again, we're recognizing, and what's kind of ironic to me as I'm kind of closing this out though, too, is, and kind of fun though, too, is we recognize how much easier it is for people to listen to something like this than for us to come together and have the conversation.
Yeah.
We recognize how much easier it might be for you, listener, to email us or to make a
Right.
comment that we can respond to. And
Yeah.
and we're going to welcome that, you know?
Yeah.
We're going to look forward to the face-to-face conversations, and we're going to look forward to hearing about all the ones that you're able to grow in as you go from this place. But we're going to embrace it too. We're going to embrace you where you're at and do what we can do. In the same way that we try and walk alongside of all of our students and families
Yep.
here in our community too. So next time, join us. We've hit messy prayers. We've hit loud tables. Now it's time to open up those doors.
Yes.
That terrifying conversation about hospitality. But Don does a great job of inviting that us into that conversation. And so we'll look forward to next time when we get to talk about that in chapter number 6.